This job has allowed me to form relationships with people, all shades of orange and green and everything else in between. I said to everybody, this island is big enough to share for everyone. I don't own it, you don't own it. There's enough people here to work with. It's not about put your hand around your homework and say, sorry, I don't collaborate with you.
For us, it's not just about talking to people, sharing ideas. It's about shared experiences and very much about shared feelings.
There's a lot of things in this work I think that people don't really understand. It's not just about getting people into a room. We have a whole thought process before that, before we even get them into the room.
The conscious work of Rural Community Network is giving rural people that recognition and a voice and a seat at the table to say, we're here too, don't forget about the rural interests as well. You're getting to know people and experiencing people, working with people, sharing with people at a level that you don't get in other sectors.
Anybody doing good relations work knows the personality of the person delivering it to you, the atmosphere, the environment plays a key role in anything else. I always see good relations starting with an individual and about a person, and Mother Teresa always said that peace starts with a smile, and that's the way that I would always approach my work. I think it's about relationships and good relations between people and communities, because the subjects are so difficult. They can be dark. Some of it can be dry stuff too as well, because you have to do this to go and do something else. But you're dealing with emotions and feelings and people's lives. And I am very conscious of that.
Good relations to me is anything that brings people together. It's one of the amazing things about good relations work, and especially the journey that I have had in this field. It challenges you personally every day about the stuff that you carry into the room too. And it's about people being allowed to be themselves with each other in a safe space, in a safe way.
I've been known to be able to stretch 1,000 pounds the length and breadth of the island. I've become very, very, very resourceful. I always worked in inner cities and in housing estates and on interfaces, and then when I moved to React in Armagh, then my work became more council-wide and then district-wide. So instead of working in a city in Armagh, I ended up working with all sort of rural hinterland people as well from right around the Armagh City and District Council area. About a month after I came here, they were naming rural areas all over Northern Ireland, areas I'd never heard of, and I went and bought a big map.
75% of the land mass of Northern Ireland would be termed rural, and then there's nearly 700,000 people, according to the 2011 census, that live in what's defined as a rural area, which is about, at the time, it was like 37% of the population of Northern Ireland lived in an area with less than 5,000 people.
And at the start, when I did this job, that slightly overwhelmed me, thinking, how will I ever do all of that? It's a regional job, it's rural, the needs are just the same in urban and rural. People have this perception that if you don't live in a hot spot or an interface, that the needs are, there are no needs in rural areas, and there very much was. And I think there's a perception maybe as well, because it is 75% of the sort of land mass and the population is huge, that the money comes with that. It is completely the opposite. RCN works for its good relations work on a shoestring budget.
I still get my map out to see where some of the areas that we're talking about. The way that we have used history in this country in the past has been, very often, when we still do it, but we did it much more in the past, is we poke each other in the chest and we say, we're never going to forget what you did to us, and we're not going to let you forget it either. And that's really toxic. In my previous work, in my previous life, before I came to work for Rural Community Network, I'd been working regionally and in many rural areas anyway. I started off doing youth diversionary projects, and I was taking groups across the world in different places and vocational training and peace programs. When I went into that job, I very much knew it was about building good relations with people. And what I found was that just being me and just meeting the person and discovering them as I went along was a far better way of building relationships with them.
If somebody had told me at 24, 25 you were going to be doing this, I probably would have run a mile. I probably would have went, oh, I can't do that, I'm a young woman, blah, blah, blah. My job was a coordinator for a community development project, and for 3 years, that was my ground, my foundation. Then the community relations work sort of seeped in. Looking back then, I was not aware that I was doing community relations work because my job title didn't say that. But 20 years later, looking back on that, every contentious issue that you could think of in community relations work at the hardest edges of it is what I was doing at 24, 25, 26. Like, I'm from an ordinary housing estate. I'm just an ordinary girl, born and reared in a working class community. I'm still very proud of that. At the start of my career, the first 10 years of my career was targets, large amounts of money, urban. And when I came here, it was targets, little to no money, and the whole 6 counties. I thought, well, I've done, about 10 years in an urban. Now let's have a go and see if I can develop that rural work that I had done in Armagh. A lot of my work in the first 2 years was really around storytelling circles and beads work with women. And I really had to learn to be quiet. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not quiet. Is not my middle name. I've had to learn that. I didn't like silences. I'm not good with silence. So whenever I'm sitting in silence and all, I don't even feel awkward about it. So that has had to be something that I've had to get used to. Quietness, reflective stuff, healing stuff. Not everybody's tarred with the same brush, and I think you take people as you get them. I've learned over 10 years that money's not the be all and end all. I've seen rural communities do a lot with £1,500. So it doesn't have to be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds. It would be lovely if you had that and it was used in the right way. But rural communities can do a lot with £500. I've seen rural communities do some stuff with the project that we had in the Causeway Coast and Glens. I think the budget was £200. So it doesn't have to be in the hundreds of thousands. But I think at least if you're offering it to urban, give rural a bite of the cherry, give rural a chance, but also give rural a hands up, because this is maybe new to them. They're not used to this. They need more advice, more support.
In This Together project was funded by the Housing Executive, and it was pretty much Charmain's idea, and it was about assisting rural practitioners in their work. Part of the remit of the work that me and Charmain do is about supporting rural practitioners. We ended up with a series of 9 workshops, and it was around stuff like dealing with the trauma and the grief of COVID, because we were right in the middle of the pandemic.
Right in the middle of the third lockdown.
The third lockdown there at that stage. There'd been huge amount of death, huge amount of anxiety in society, how it was affecting us as individuals, us in our work, how it was affecting the communities out there, how was it affecting children. So how do you educate? How do you raise children in the middle of a pandemic? So these were all topics that we looked at as part of the sessions. Very often rural practitioners are quite isolated. Many of them, work in an individual capacity rather than for an agency, or they work for small agencies. And
we were worried at that time about relationships being online and the level of sectarianism and racism and homophobia. We were very conscious during the third lockdown that what was normally said behind closed doors was being very publicly written on Facebook and Twitter walls. And
my definition of good relations work, it happens at whatever level. It's creating shared experiences in shared space.
And then we spoke to each other about we need to do something to help practitioners to identify the dangers of social media and how good relations work can dissipate in a minute, with people just starting to comment on threads. When people talk to me about their sense of place, their townlands, I can understand now about why they're so precious about the land.
The way that we approached the Shared History Fund was really to say we want everybody that lives in this wee patch of earth to feel that they can come forward and participate and have something to share. We're going to use our history in a different way that unites us rather than divides us. So that's why it was so powerful, why it was so unique.
We applied to the National Lottery Heritage Fund in Northern Ireland for the shared history money. We were the only rural regional in Northern Ireland to get that funding. And it's been a challenge in itself, and it's been a lot of hard work, particularly when, you know, the date for the creation of Northern Ireland has gone. And with the pandemic, a lot of the groups didn't get to do what they wanted to do. A lot of their stuff ended up being online.
Everybody that you work with has a past, and you never know what that past is, and you're never quite sure about what the person in the room has experienced. And so you have to take care of that. The whole thing about the centenary of the creation of the state of Northern Ireland, well, it was the creation of 2 states, that's the first thing, because of partition. And there are sensitivities around that, and especially around the language that you use, and depending on who you're working with, what groups and what communities you're working in. You know, and I think the personal touch really helps when you're working on those sensitive issues, particularly with groups that may not have an affinity or have a, you know, sort of an identity, or they see themselves as not having an identity with this state that they live in, and we respect that, and we try and ensure that the type of work that we do and the way that we do it takes account of that.
We were hoping to do this all face-to-face, and then thankfully the Department of Foreign Affairs allowed us to transfer everything online. So all of our shared history courses all became digital and online. At the start, it was a real challenge for our facilitators because there was 4 of them involved. They did virtual tours, they did YouTube videos, all that kind of stuff. And we ended up having, I think it was about 80 to 100 people did the first rounds, didn't they really, between January and March. So what ended up for us being a project that might be 6 months with the pandemic was had to move right along now until nearly a year. So we're about halfway through that project now, but our work that we're doing is very much on an ethical and shared basis. It's very much looking at all communities, and it's very much looking at the journey of Northern Ireland from partition from 1921 to 2021, so it's 100 years of rural. We've sort of struggled with a wee bit, and I think everybody has in the community relations field, in that there's only so much you can do in a virtual space.
My preferred approach is face-to-face, and I look forward to the day that we go back to that. But there's definitely a space there as well, and an opportunity there to use the technology.
Through the pandemic, we have had nothing cancelled at all through the pandemic. Every single programme, workshop, conference, course has had people on it. And normally before that, if it was in a geographic area, and maybe in a village hall or in a hotel somewhere, you'd have been sitting wondering, how many am I going to get here? And you might have had none. So
the technology's made life easier for us and able to reach more people. But that's part of the challenge of this work, is how do we reach the hard to reach? There's this kind of idea that, you know, the digital technology has opened up access to everybody. It hasn't. There's still groups of people out there that are still hard to reach. Where it used to be geographic groups of people, in the last 2 years, it's mostly people on their own. It's been more about individuals now, less about villages and towns, less about community groups. When I first started out, it would have been shared space projects in a village, community group stuff, especially when we've done all our training. Now, in the last 1.5 to 2 years, it's individuals coming forward who are not involved in community work or community groups in any shape or form. And we've had people, like I had a guy recently who did a programme with us who was blind, who was from the Kilkeel area, who had never engaged with RCN before, and from a rural area. His daughter hooked him up to Zoom, and he was able to engage in our shared history programme by listening into and I got a lovely letter and email from his daughter, a few weeks later, to thank us for that, and said that her father had never engaged in any sort of programme on World War I, World War II, and thanks to our course, he was able to do it for the very first time in his life. So that keeps me going, I think, when we think about Zooming, because there will be people that we've never touched before. We've had people sitting in a Zoom room from every county, really, in Northern Ireland doing our courses. We would never have had that before. I like that approach of individual journeys towards peace
rather than people being pressurised to do stuff as part of a group. So I could have 1,000 people now in a year all doing a different thing at different times and all going in totally different directions, doing their own different thing. I'll never be able to track that. But I'll be able to, at least I'll be able to say that we were the starting point of that.
It's quite a unique type of work where you're building relational depth with people. For me, it's always about checking your ego. And I think ego is a huge barrier when it comes to relationships. So many of us carry around this little fragile, fractured ego that if you only chip the surface, you'll see the real person come out from underneath. And that all comes from hurt, pain, frustration underneath that has not been addressed, not been heard, not been worked with, not been supported. It's good for us all, for all communities, to do well, to work well together. That's a huge part of the community development approach, and that really supports the community relations. It's extremely rewarding. So diverse, you're never quite sure what you're going to be doing from day to day, which really helps you develop transferable skills. I'll speak personally, you kind of discover yourself as well as you find yourself faced with new challenges every day.
The community relations field is a small field, but the people in that field are absolutely generous of their time and their friendship.
And it's the lovely thing about this work. There are so many giants in this field, and they're so generous with their time and their spirit and their energy.
The opportunities that come through this job, I never, ever would have thought.
You really do feel like you're making a difference in doing this type of work. You kind of start off doing something, and this type of work, then something else comes along straight after it, and then don't get me wrong, the workload's crazy at times, and it's stressful.
Yeah.
But it's challenging work. I absolutely love it. It's what I'm passionate about.
I mean, this job has allowed me to build very strong, solid friendships with people who are oppositely different from me culturally, identity-wise. Where I live, I might never have been given the opportunities to meet people so different from myself if I had been working even maybe in a council area.
One of the things about community development work and community relations work that I always try to bear in mind, which is about not leaving pockets of society behind, because eventually it comes up to bite us again.